All right. Welcome in, everybody. You know why you're here. You're here for the deep dive, ready to get into some pretty wild stuff today, and ready to understand it quickly.
That's right. Cut through the noise and get straight to the core of things. That's what we do.
I'm excited about this one. We've got, a really interesting pairing today. We're going to look at excerpts from The Spanish Love Deception, which, for those who don't know, is a pretty popular romance novel.
Lots of romantic tension, lots of deception, even in the title, right?
Absolutely. It's all there.
Yeah.
And then we're going to switch gears, I guess you could say, and look at some material that deals with, theories of global control, a hidden cult manipulating world events.
Yeah, going from a love deception to, potentially a much bigger, more shadowy deception. It might seem like a strange mix.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But stick with us, because what we're really going to do is, we're going to explore some of those overlaps. The themes of deception, manipulation, and control. They pop up in both.
They really do. And seeing them side by side can, I think it can tell us a lot about relationships, about the world, about how we make sense of things.
Exactly. So let's dive in. Let's start with the fiction, The Spanish Love Deception. Get into those intricate little deceptions.
Oh, good.
Right off the bat, we meet Lena, and she's dealing with, kind of a classic situation. Her sister's wedding is coming up.
Big family event.
Huge. And, her ex is going to be there, Daniel, with his new fiancé.
Oof. Yeah, that's a tough one. Lots of people have been there, right?
Yeah.
That social pressure, the family expectations.
And Lena's feeling it big time. The first things she thinks of doing are, they're pretty extreme. Hiring an actor, even a professional escort, just to have a date for the wedding.
It does make you wonder, why so desperate?
I think it shows just how much she wants to avoid showing up alone, especially with Daniel there. Maybe it's about not appearing vulnerable.
Could be. Or wanting to control how everyone sees her. Present a certain image. It's something we all do to some extent, right?
Right. Absolutely. We all want to manage how people perceive us. And sometimes, I guess, we go to pretty great lengths. But then, out of the blue, her colleague, Aaron Blackford, kind of gets involved. And her view of him, let's just say it's not exactly positive at the start.
Not love at first sight, then.
Not even close. We get these hints of, some past friction. She remembers him saying, the girl doesn't even need to try.
Oh, that stings.
Isn't it? Like there's this history, something happened, maybe a misunderstanding. But then Aaron does something surprising. He defends her. Stands up to a colleague who's being rude to Lena. It's a real shift.
Interesting. So he's more complex than he initially seems. Those quiet types can be surprising.
Right. And Lena herself, she's interesting too. She wants to seem so strong and independent, but then we see these glimpses of, vulnerability, like when she tries to ignore that she's hungry.
The classic, I'm fine when you're clearly not. Been there.
Who hasn't? It's like she's trying to convince herself, that she doesn't need anything. Not from anyone.
That internal conflict is key, I think, because it sets us up for her eventually needing Aaron's help, even though she really doesn't want to.
Which is exactly what happens. Remember when he offers to help her with a work presentation? And she's so resistant. Why do you think that is?
It could be pride, maybe a fear of being indebted to him, appearing incapable.
Yeah, maybe. It's like that classic thing of needing help but not wanting to show it. Aaron actually calls her out on it. He says, you need the help because we both know you'd never ask.
He's got her number, doesn't he?
He really does. And then we get to the whole fake dating arrangement for the wedding in Spain. That starts with a seemingly small lie to her mother.
A little white lie to avoid the awkward questions. We've all been there.
Right. But that little lie, it sets off this whole chain of deception.
Snowball effect. It happens.
And her friend Rosie, her reaction is perfect. It's like she's scandalized, but also finds it hilarious. Our friends often see our crazy schemes more clearly than we do.
Absolutely. They can provide that much-needed reality check. Or at least a dose of humor.
Exactly. But as the wedding gets closer, you can feel Lena's feelings about Aaron getting more muddled. She keeps remembering those past interactions, times when she felt overlooked by him or even belittled. It's like that past history is coloring how she sees him now.
Past perceptions are powerful. They can really shape our present relationships.
Yeah.
Even when, like in this case, things are changing.
Right. And then remember that scene when he drives her home in the rain? They're bickering as usual. He calls her crazy, but then he admits he needs her.
Needs her. That's an interesting choice of words, even if it's said in the middle of an argument.
It is, isn't it? It makes you wonder what's really going on under the surface.
Definitely makes you think. And then there's all that pre-wedding chaos at Lena's apartment.
Yeah.
Trying to tidy up before he arrives. So relatable.
Oh, so relatable. It's like that universal scramble to make a good first impression, even when, it's a fake first impression for a fake relationship. And the phone number mix-up, her grudge holding.
Oh, that was classic.
Right. It just shows how they are, a little bit stubborn and set in their ways.
And then Aaron just shows up at her apartment, unannounced. Pretty bold move. And the way he reacts to her appearance, the text says his expression hardens and his jaw cramps down tightly.
Yeah, that's intense. What was going on there? Was he, genuinely upset or something else? Maybe surprised?
Who knows? Lots to unpack there.
Lots to unpack. And then, of course, the car ride to the wedding events. More awkward silences. More bickering. It's like their way of communicating.
If you can call it communicating. But then, remember the Elvis underwear auction? Lena's trying to lighten the mood, make jokes. It feels like a turning point.
It does, doesn't it? Like they're trying to find some common ground, beneath all the animosity. Laughter can do that, even if it's a little awkward at first.
Totally. And then the bidding war for Aaron at the auction.
Classic rom-com stuff.
Right. But it also makes you think, seeing someone through someone else's eyes, it can change your own perspective.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the dance. That unexpected charged dance between them, that changes things. Big time.
Definitely heats things up. The physical closeness, the unspoken intimacy, it's like their fake relationship is starting to, feel a little too real.
Exactly. It's like they're pretending to be a couple and then boom, real emotions start to creep in. Remember when Lena teases him about being scared and then her wanting to comfort him?
Big moment. Shows how her feelings are shifting. It's not just about keeping up appearances anymore. There's something real there.
Definitely. And then out of nowhere, Aaron ends their deal. Why do you think he did that? Getting cold feet, maybe? Worried about where things were going?
Could be. He might have been feeling things he wasn't expecting. Or, maybe it was his way of trying to regain control. Things are definitely getting complicated.
They were, and Lena's all confused. She needs to know what he told her sister Isabel. Part of it is that fear of her lie being exposed, but I think it's more than that. She wants to know how he sees her,
Of course. And then there's that misunderstanding about whether Aaron implied he'd actually be at the wedding. Seems like a simple miscommunication, but maybe it was also a bit of wishful thinking on Lena's part, and that moment when she realizes she'd been subconsciously waiting for him to contact her.
That's a big one. It shows she cares more than she wants to admit.
Absolutely. And then, remember their little banter at the coffee shop? Always fighting me, resisting me.
It's like they can't help but poke at each other, even when it's clear there's something more going on.
Their way of flirting, maybe?
Maybe. And then Lena admits that Aaron's becoming important to her. Big step.
Huge. And then, right on cue, her cousin Charo shows up and just assumes they're a couple.
Of course. And Daniel shows up, too. More awkward introductions. Daniel even comments on how they interact, like he's picking up on something real.
Sometimes outsiders can see things more clearly.
It's true. And Lena's trying so hard to seem happy, keep up the facade. But it's getting harder. The lines are blurring. They're practically living the romance they're pretending to have.
Makes you wonder if sometimes faking it can lead to, actually feeling it.
Right. Then there's that scene where they dance again, more physical and emotional intimacy. And her sister Isabel, she's totally buying into the whole relationship, which just makes things even more complicated.
And then Aaron really lays it on thick with Isabel. He says Lena made him give her the time of day and talked her into believing that she needed him and then proved to her that she did.
Wow. That's quite a statement.
It is. Makes you wonder what his game plan was all along.
Right. And Isabel, well, she gets emotional, accuses Lena of keeping secrets. The family drama is in full swing.
And Aaron just chimes in with, see, it's a very good thing I'm here.
It's like he's enjoying the role a little too much. And Lena, she's so conflicted. She's right on the verge of admitting her feelings, but she's scared.
That fear of vulnerability, it's a powerful thing.
It is. And then Aaron does something really unexpected. He opens up to her, tells her about his past, his family.
Wow, that's huge. A real sign of trust. Letting someone see that side of you.
Right. And then, they end up sharing a bed. Awkwardness ensues.
Of course.
But then he gets her a donut. It's a small gesture, but it shows he cares.
It's often the little things, isn't it? And then,
Yeah.
Things get even more intimate. Makes you wonder if Aaron planned that all along.
Maybe he did. And Rosie's text message, totally confirms that everyone can see what's going on.
Everyone except Lena.
Maybe. And then we get that confession from Aaron. He admits he was attracted to her from the start, but he panicked. So he tried to avoid her, and then eventually he just decided he'd take any interaction he could get, even negative ones, just to be near her.
So all those prickly interactions, they were his way of, well, I guess, trying to deal with his feelings.
Right. And then Rosie tells Lena, straight up, that she's being blind and stubborn.
Sometimes you just need a friend to tell it like it is.
Definitely. And then finally, after the wedding, when they're apart, Lena starts to realize her true feelings. Distance can give you clarity, you know.
It really can. It can help you see what you're missing. Okay, so we've seen this whole intricate dance of deception and, evolving emotions in a romantic relationship.
It's intense, right?
Totally. But now buckle up, because we're about to switch gears completely.
Yeah, we're moving from the personal to the planetary.
Exactly. We're diving into these theories about global control, this hidden cult that's supposedly pulling the strings.
It is a big leap. So tell me, what's the basic idea here?
Well, the core of this theory is that there's this secret group, often called the spider, that's controlling society or the web through secret societies and, well, just the straight-up manipulation of information.
Okay, so a completely different scale of deception. And how do they supposedly do it? What are their methods?
Well, two key strategies they talk about are, first, what they call problem-reaction solution, and then the totalitarian tiptoe.
Those sound a little ominous.
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
So the problem-reaction solution model is basically this. The cult, they create a problem. Or, maybe they just let it happen. This creates a reaction from the public. People get scared, angry, whatever. And that reaction, that's what they use to justify a solution that they had planned all along.
So it's like a manufactured crisis that leads to a predetermined outcome. Clever if it's true.
Right. And then the totalitarian tiptoe, that's the idea that they implement control gradually, bit by bit.
So people don't notice until it's too late.
Exactly. It's harder to resist small changes than big, sudden ones.
It's like the boiling frog analogy.
Precisely.
So what's the end game here? What kind of world are they supposedly trying to create?
A globally centralized system of control. A single world government. Cashless digital currency that they control. AI surveillance everywhere to watch the population. It's pretty dystopian when you think about it.
It really is. And this theory, it has some interesting takes on different groups and movements, like green parties, for example. They're seen as unknowingly serving this cult's agenda through, the whole climate change narrative.
Yeah. The idea is that even well-intentioned groups, people who really do care about the environment, they're being manipulated.
And then there's this group called the Sebastian Frankists. They're described as posing as Jewish to conceal their manipulative activities. It's important to note the source is very clear that this group is not representative of Judaism itself.
Absolutely. That's a crucial distinction.
This theory claims that even seemingly opposing forces like Israel and Arab dictatorships, they're secretly aligned under this Sebastian control.
It's a pretty wild claim. It suggests that on some level, many of the conflicts we see, they're not what they appear, that these groups are working together.
And even historical figures like Karl Marx are brought into it. His work is seen as part of a larger plan to undermine traditional religion.
It's a way of looking at history through this lens of a hidden hand guiding things.
And even things like mass shootings are interpreted through this lens as being exploited by the cult to push for things like, gun control.
Yeah. It's like they see every major event as part of this grand scheme.
Then there's this really controversial claim that accusations of anti-Semitism are actually a Sebastian protection racket. The idea is that they deliberately frame any criticism of them as anti-Semitic to shut down any discussion.
A pretty bold accusation. And then there's the financial system. This theory sees the whole system as a tool of control, with debt being controlled by the cult through central banks.
A lot of people are concerned about the power of central banks.
Right, and this theory taps into that.
Even the January 6th Capitol riot, it's interpreted as a permitted event, like something the cult allowed to happen for some reason.
It does make you wonder. Immigration is another big one. This theory sees it as a deliberate manipulation by the cult.
To destabilize societies, create division, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And then there's the whole QAnon phenomenon. They talk about the save me syndrome. The idea is that people are looking for a savior, and the cult exploits that.
Interesting. Okay, so then we get to COVID-19, which is, a huge focus of a lot of these theories.
Oh, yeah. This source, it goes all in. They claim that the reported cases and deaths, were fakery, based on a flawed PCR test. They even bring up Kary Mullis, the guy who invented PCR.
Right. And while he did have some concerns about how it was being used, it's important to remember that his views aren't, the consensus in the scientific community.
Sure.
This theory even claims that the virus, SARS-CoV-2, has never actually been isolated, that its genome is just something cooked up on a computer.
Yeah, that's a major point of contention with mainstream science. And then there's the alternative view they present, that so-called viruses are just breakdown products of tissues.
And that vaccines are actually the harmful agents, which is a pretty radical departure from, what we generally understand about biology and immunology.
To say the least.
They also claim that COVID-19 diagnoses, especially early on in places like Italy, were just a redesignation of diagnosis.
Like they were just calling other respiratory illnesses COVID.
Right. And they're very critical of Neil Ferguson, the epidemiologist. They say his models were flawed and, used to justify lockdowns and other restrictions.
He has been criticized for his modeling in the past.
He has. And then there's the claim that the symptoms we associate with COVID-19 were actually caused by the rollout of 5G technology.
A lot of people were saying that.
They were. But it's a claim that doesn't have any real scientific backing.
Right.
There's also the claim that death certificates were deliberately changed to inflate the number of COVID deaths, and the accusation of heartless cruelty toward the elderly during lockdowns.
That was a difficult time for a lot of people, especially older folks.
Absolutely. And this theory is very critical of the mRNA vaccines. They say they're not real vaccines, that they haven't been tested properly, and that they could cause all sorts of harm, including genocide and autoimmune diseases.
Strong claims.
Very strong. And they talk about digital hate initiatives, saying they're being used to silence anyone who questions the official COVID narrative.
It's true that a lot of information was and is being censored on social media.
Right. And this theory paints a picture of this very organized hierarchy with the cult at the top controlling everything during the pandemic.
A top-down control structure.
Exactly. They claim the whole COVID thing was a hoax designed to establish lockdowns, instill fear, promote vaccines, and ultimately control the population. They repeat the claim that the PCR test can't detect infectious disease and was used fraudulently.
Right. And they point to the fact that, according to them, no one has ever isolated the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Again, that goes against the scientific consensus.
It does.
They also bring up extracellular vesicles, or EVs, saying these are what's being mistaken for viruses. And they talk about virus theology, basically critiquing the whole history of how we understand viruses and disease.
So they're presenting a very different view of everything.
They really are. They say the symptoms attributed to COVID-19 are actually just common symptoms of other respiratory illnesses. They're very skeptical of doctors and the medical system, saying they're all in on it.
Wow.
They even claim that hospitals were given financial incentives to list deaths as COVID-related.
And they predict that lockdowns and vaccine campaigns will never end. They say it will all be driven by manipulated PCR tests and new variants.
So a pretty bleak outlook.
It is, and they draw a comparison between vaccine mandates and Nazi Germany, which is a very controversial and, for a lot of people, a very offensive comparison.
Definitely. And they talk about vaccine passports as a tool of control, and they bring up this document from the Rockefeller Foundation that supposedly hints at plans for human augmentation.
So it's all connected in their view.
It all ties together. They see woke ideology and transgender activism as part of this too, as tools for what they call creative destruction and the erasure of traditional gender roles.
And then there's the whole smart grid and Internet of Bodies thing.
Right. They say it's all controlled by AI, and that the COVID vaccines are somehow part of it, maybe introducing nanotechnology or something.
And they point to China and Israel as key locations where all this is being developed.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then there's this idea that the human brain only processes a tiny fraction of reality, which, if you think about it, leaves a lot of room for manipulation.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If we're only aware of a small slice of what's really going on, then, well, it's easier for someone to control what we perceive.
Right. They talk about the true eye and how the cult is trying to keep us trapped in our five senses, preventing us from accessing this deeper level of awareness. And then they bring in this concept from Gnosticism, Yaldabaoth, who they say is like the Old Testament God, and also the Freemasons' great architect.
Symbolized by the all-seeing eye.
Right. And they say Yaldabaoth wants to keep us trapped in this material world in our bodies, which they see as a kind of prison. They even suggest that the world might be a simulation, a bad copy of the real thing.
Like the Matrix.
Exactly. And they say the way to break free is well, to expand our awareness. They also talk about wetiko, which is a concept from Native American traditions. It's basically a force of evil chaos that divides people and lacks empathy. They say it's very similar to the Gnostic archons.
Interesting connection.
It is, isn't it? And they say the Wetiko grid is basically the global smart grid, and that technology like 5G is part of this whole simulation.
So it all ties together.
It does. They say the cult is anti-human because it's driven by this Wetiko consciousness, which is, well, not human and wants to destroy everything that's natural. They talk about all human systems being targeted for deletion, the biological being replaced with the synthetic.
Chilling stuff.
It is. They say the cult uses fear and humiliation to control us. And they talk about a leadership program called Common Purpose as being, a network of people within governments who are all pushing the same agenda. They see woke ideology as a tool being used to manipulate the left. And they say things like carbon dioxide aren't actually pollutants.
So they're covering a lot of ground here.
They are, and they're very critical of Big Pharma, particularly when it comes to vaccine development. They bring up the idea of a phantom vaccine for a phantom disease, meaning they don't believe the virus is real.
Right.
They mention Dr. Michael Yeadon, who's been a vocal critic of the COVID vaccines, and they talk about adverse reactions, saying they're being underreported.
A lot of people have concerns about that.
They do. And they say deaths in care homes and in Israel went way up after vaccination. They even claim that Bill Gates offered a $10 million bribe in Nigeria.
Wow.
I know. They see travel restrictions for the unvaccinated as a form of control, and they bring up Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, who's also been very critical of the vaccines.
There are definitely a lot of different perspectives out there.
There are. They also mentioned Dr. Tal Zaks from Moderna, who once talked about hacking the software of life with mRNA technology. And they point to a document from Moderna that says mRNA could potentially be used to treat all sorts of diseases.
So they're concerned about the potential for this technology to be used in ways we don't fully understand.
Exactly. They say vaccine hesitancy is a threat to the cult's plans. And they talk about the possibility of humans being re-engineered through genetic engineering. They say the COVID vaccines could be a first step towards this.
They see it as a slippery slope.
They do. And they talk about human 2.0 and the idea of a human hive mind where everyone's connected and controlled.
So it goes way beyond just COVID.
It does. They also mention implantable technology that could be used to monitor and control people remotely. And they bring up the simulation idea again.
The idea that we're not living in the real world.
Right. But they say we can resist all this by, opening our hearts and laughing.
Laughter is powerful.
It is. They say these DNA manipulating vaccines could disrupt the connection between the soul and the body. And they talk about the censorship of doctors and scientists who disagree with the official COVID narrative.
Which, as we said, is definitely happening.
It is. They say the official narratives are all lies and that they're trying to hide the fact that, that there is no virus.
So there you have it. A whirlwind tour of some pretty intense and, controversial ideas.
It's a lot to take in. And it's interesting, isn't it, how we've gone from this very personal story of deception in a romantic relationship to this massive global theory of deception.
Two very different levels, but the same underlying themes.
Exactly. In The Spanish Love Deception, Lena's trying to avoid social pressure, and that leads her down this path of elaborate lies.
And in these global control theories, it's often about power.
Right. And both stories make you think about the power of authority, how it can influence what we believe both in our personal relationships and in the wider world, and how emotions can cloud our judgment.
Absolutely. It's about who we trust and why.
Exactly. Now, obviously, these two perspectives, they have very different levels of plausibility.
To say the least.
But both of them, I think, they make us think about the motivations behind deception. Why do people lie? Why do they manipulate? What are they trying to gain?
Questions.
Big questions. So we've explored these themes of deception and control from some pretty unusual angles today. Hopefully it's giving you some food for thought.
Definitely.
Because in a world where information can be so easily manipulated and where people's intentions aren't always clear, it's more important than ever to think critically.
To question what you see and hear. To trust your gut.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, to laugh a little along the way. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
Until next time.